Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to And World Peace. I am your host, Maggie Gehlsen-Burnett. Wowzers. You guys, I have to admit, it has taken me a very long time to record this intro because I've been sick as fuck for the last, I don't know, what feels like 6 weeks. We got sick around Thanksgiving, then my husband got sick, then I got sick, then we both got sick. I mean, it's just been kind of a shit show over here. So really no better person to have on the podcast today than somebody who can speak all about health and wellness, particularly women's health and wellness. But hey, before we get into that, I wanted to let you know that In World Peace is on Substack. So all of these episodes also release sort of in cohesion with my Substack, which is also called In World Peace. So you can find my Substack at substack.com/@mgelsen. I will link that in the show notes. I am going to be moving to a paid model for my Substack in 2025. I'm not exactly sure when, but hopefully soon-ish. So that is truly one of the best ways that you can support me, that you can support really anybody who is trying to put their writing or their content out into the world, is to follow them on Substack, follow them on their newsletter platforms, whatever that may be, not just Substack. So yeah, that's one of the best ways that you can support the show. Also, sorry, I sound like shit. I forgot to mention that. I'm still working to get over this little bug that I have, so apologies. But I was not sick when I did this lovely recording with our beautiful guest that we have joining us today. Her name is Jillian Greaves. Let me tell you a little bit about Jillian. So Jillian is a functional dietitian and women's health specialist. She is the owner of the private practice Jillian Greaves Functional Nutrition and Wellness, and she is the creator of the PCOS Root Reversal Program. Jillian provides comprehensive nutrition and lifestyle counseling to women with a special emphasis on PCOS, fertility, hormone balance, and digestive health. Jillian and her team help women identify and address the root causes of their hormone and digestive symptoms using advanced lab testing, wow, that's a tongue twister, personalized nutrition, and supportive lifestyle therapies as the first line of intervention. It's her mission to empower women to take back control of their health, reclaim their confidence, and to experience life at its fullest potential. And one thing that I do love about this is that I actually just started seeing a functional medical practitioner because I basically was having some symptoms that no other provider could really figure out. And I will say it has been such a lovely experience. One thing I do admittedly get a little bit scared of with people who identify as quote, functional practitioners is sort of this concept of misinformation, which is something that Jillian and I actually talk a lot about in this episode. So I loved chatting with Jillian because she is A, incredibly smart, B, she has really practical, tangible tips and advice for people who might be struggling but maybe can't go see somebody who is a functional practitioner, be it for cost purposes or because you're not in a location where that's doable. So that's one thing I loved about our conversation, was just how open Jillian was to providing those resources firsthand for people. And we also talk a lot about how sort of this misinformation is so rampant among women, particularly in women's health. So that was a really kind of enlightening and eye-opening piece of this conversation. And I really hope that you are able to take something from that and educate yourself. Education is the greatest power that we have. So this was such a lovely episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with Jillian. So I'll shut the hell up now. Let's get right into the episode and welcome Jillian to the show. Thank you so much, Jillian, for joining me. I'm super excited to chat with you. You are actually my first guest who is a registered dietitian who works, solely with women. So I'm very excited to dive into your work around that. And I have tons of questions about your work in terms of that, but we will go ahead and start with the opening question I ask all the guests, which is, tell me about kind of your own personal undoing, which, for women, typically we tend to have several, and that's
Yes.
sort of the common thread with most of my guests that I speak to, is that they're sort of like, well, which one do you want? So I will leave that up to you. But that is a big theme of this show. So I always just like to get right into it and ask people about their worst moment of their life. No.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. Where do I start? I'll try to not be, too long-winded here, but The big undoing for me was a little over 10 years ago now, which is crazy, a little over a decade ago, where I was in a phase of life where I had an undergraduate degree in nutrition. I was completing my master's degree in nutrition, moving on to, get my training as a registered dietitian. And I started to experience some health symptoms myself. And, again, at the time, I had a lot of nutrition education. I, ate what I felt was a healthy diet. I was also at the time, running half marathons, doing HIIT training, 5 days a week. Again, in school, getting my master's, I was also working full time in a clinical nutrition research setting. And essentially, as you can probably tell, I was, burning the candle at both ends. And I started to experience anxiety, difficulty sleeping. I was, breaking out, experiencing, other skin issues like eczema, bloating, and I couldn't figure out why, right? I'm like, I eat healthy, I, work out all the time. What the heck is going on? And at the time, I had also been on hormonal birth control for about a decade. And that was something I had never, really looked into, never really thought about, and was put on birth control at, a young age for, heavy, painful periods. All my friends were on it, and it was sort of, what you did. So I started to kind of seek out some support for these new symptoms I was experiencing, and was unfortunately kind of passed around a little bit in our healthcare system where, okay, you have a skin issue, let's send you to the derm, and, they recommended topical steroids or, this topical for acne. Right, you're experiencing this symptom, here's a potential option to suppress this symptom. And this was really frustrating for me. And I just wasn't willing to accept that as the solution for all of these new symptoms that were popping up. I started to kind of dig a little bit deeper into understanding hormonal birth control and this pill that I had been on again for over a decade and hadn't really looked into, or at the time didn't even really understand kind of the mechanism of action. And decided that I wanted to come off hormonal birth control and, kind of explore how my body would feel off of that. I sought out support from my conventional provider, asking for, some recommendations for making this big transition since I'd been on the pill for so long. And, she kind of had no advice for me and said, go off the pill or stay on the pill. It's up to you, and, you're on your way. And despite all the symptoms I was experiencing, she was kind of like, your labs look normal, and, there's nothing I can do. And I just remember feeling extremely defeated, and feeling like I didn't have anywhere to turn for support to actually understand why these things were happening in my body. And that's what sort of, I actually specifically remember leaving that appointment in terms of an undoing and hitting kind of a low point, just in tears and like calling my mom and feeling like I don't know what to do. And this doesn't make sense to me. And that's what really kind of drove me to start to become more educated about women's health specifically, and to really get curious about, my diet, my lifestyle habits. And I really kind of identified that, I was overdoing it in every sense of the way. I was over exercising, putting way too much stress on my body. The dietary pattern I was following at the time was just not supportive for me. Everyone is different and unique, but I was, following predominantly a plant-based diet, and, had realized that, there were a lot of gaps and holes and nutrient deficiencies that, could be contributing to things. So really started to kind of overhaul my movement routine, my nutrition, really started to prioritize nervous system support, slowing down. And, started to dive into the world of functional medicine, functional nutrition, which is really kind of asking the question why, diving a little bit deeper to understand root causes and dynamics that could be creating and driving dysfunction in the body. And, through my training and a lot of ups and downs, I was able to heal these symptoms naturally, and also to come off birth control, to get my cycle back, to have a regular period, a symptom-free period. And I'll be very honest that it took me a long time to do that, much longer than I feel that it should, should have taken. And ultimately, that's what really made me realize that I wanted to make this my life's work. And I realized how many women out there were also struggling with symptoms and struggling to find answers and, struggling where to turn to get support. And so that experience and kind of hitting that low point and that undoing really changed the trajectory of, my health and also my life and my career, and really motivated me to want to provide women with the support that I so deeply wished I had had when I was struggling.
Oh, I love that so much. I deeply resonate with your entire story, and I have several friends who do as well, and know several women who do as well. Um, because it is such a common occurrence that I think so many people just we don't understand that other people are going through it. So we feel so isolated and so alone. And I think, to your point, like 10 years ago, it was something that I don't think anyone was really talking about. Like I
Oh,
remember my first instance with really trying to understand hormonal birth control and like what it was doing to me and my body. And I was 21 maybe, so yeah, like almost 10 years ago. And there was nothing out there that was, there was like a couple of books that I read at the time that were helpful, but I'm still like a part of I just saw this the other day, a Marina like support group on Facebook that
oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
a group I joined just like totally, so like just anxious about my experience and my symptoms.
Yeah.
And so I just like very sort of frantically joined this Facebook group, of women who were having similar experiences,
Yeah.
also had no resources and nowhere to turn. So I think it's just amazing what you're doing. And we are in a state right now, unfortunately, where, women's healthcare has to be prioritized, and it has to be something that, we are giving women more access to information on. Women are, this is not news to you, but to listeners, that women are historically, understudied, and women's health is underfunded. So there's not a ton of information about, in sort of the mainstream, about what women's health issues look like or what they sound like or feel like even. So I just think it's so important that, we have people like you who are doing this work for other women. So I love that. Um, so, kind of going off of this, you talk a lot about your experience with birth control being kind of like the underlying kind of culprit of a lot of these issues. What would you say to somebody who is maybe experiencing something similar, who might think that birth control could be maybe the smoking gun in
Yep.
their situation, and maybe what would be a place for them to start in this entire process?
I love that question. And, ultimately, so when it comes to hormonal birth control, what I will say, and I want to mention this about medications in general, I am never anti-medication or, anti, any tool that an individual decides is the right tool for them. My big issue with hormonal birth control in how it's used in our current healthcare system is the lack of informed consent. So women aren't given all the information that they need to make that informed decision. And I'll be the first one to say that, as someone in the health space, and that's a women's health specialist, back when I was going through things, I had no idea how, birth control worked.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that there is absolutely a time and place for hormonal birth control. And what matters is that it's the right decision for you. But we do know that hormonal birth control, and there's different types, can have some side effects. The oral contraceptive, the combined oral contraceptive that, a lot of women take, is a pill that can, deplete specific nutrients that can be key in the body. It can disrupt the gut microbiome. It can impact the liver, have implications for gut health, for mood. And everyone is different, but I think it's important for women to just really understand what their options are. And again, to be able to make that informed decision. I think what really grinds my gears is when women are experiencing symptoms. So maybe their periods are miserable or irregular. Maybe they're experiencing, acne. Um, and they are told that birth control is their only option. Birth control is an option, but it's not the only option. And the tough thing there is that, birth control is essentially shutting down the reproductive system. So it's, shutting off our hormones, and it's essentially, a form of symptom suppression when it's used in these cases to manage symptoms. So what we see often is, not only some secondary symptoms related to birth control, but women coming off birth control and having these symptoms come back with vengeance, which is what happened to me, because I didn't know how to support my body with that transition. And I had to hack it together. And again, it took a lot longer to kind of achieve symptom resolution. But ultimately, what I like to kind of explain to clients is that if we're experiencing symptoms related to hormones, this is a way our body is communicating with us. It's a way that our body is saying, hey, something is off, and, I might need some deeper support here. So again, I think it's important for women to understand, if they are choosing birth control, how that birth control is working in the body, and just making sure that it feels like the right move for them. Something I would definitely encourage women to do is, if you're, I think you had mentioned, what's a woman to do if they're, say, on, hormonal birth control, and they're feeling like this might be playing a role with my symptoms. I would definitely encourage you to talk to your, practitioner about that first and foremost, and express your concerns, express your symptoms, document and kind of track what's going on, and ask for their support in investigating this further. If your provider is not willing to do that, that's okay. There are other providers out there that are going to be willing to do that. So sometimes we also just need to find the right fit in terms of the practitioner that's kind of willing to put their, detective hat on and do a little bit of, deeper digging.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Yeah. There sort of tends to be I'll say I only say this from my own personal experience with this as well, that I feel like when all of my stuff was happening, and I unfortunately at the time had a practitioner who wasn't very, receptive to what I was telling them. And we ended up, exploring tons of different things. And there were tons of different issues that stemmed as a, sort of byproduct of hormonal birth control. But I remember thinking to myself, like, I basically swung to the opposite end of the spectrum, where I was basically like, well, screw traditional medicine. I'm going to go, completely functional and, completely like homeopathic, and I'm not going to even like resort to anything that these doctors are telling me. So, and now I definitely live in the center, and I'm very like, I have a wonderful practitioner I love who, practices, medicine in a very traditional sense. And I also have a nurse practitioner who does more, natural medicine and, things like that. So I love living in the middle. I think it's a great place to be if you can find the providers who will be willing to live there with you. So I love that you make that point. In terms of women's health especially, and I guess, more broadly speaking, just health kind of in general, we live in a world where there's just loads and loads of information online, and also loads of misinformation online. So there just kind of is like tons of stuff that we have to sift through, especially as women. I think women are, I would venture to say statistically are probably ones doing more research on their health versus men. That's just what I've experienced firsthand from seeing like my own friends, researching their health, and myself. So take that with a grain. But I would love to know from your experience as a practitioner in this space, how this sort of like misinformation, epidemic has impacted women directly, how you've seen that sort of come to fruition in your work, and maybe how we can help women sort of just kind of deal with this epidemic, and sort of like what would be, the kind of tools they could implement to really understand what is health misinformation versus what is an actual, solid piece of information that's true and factual, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So much misinformation out there. And it's frustrating because, women, I agree with you, women are really, kind of put in a position where they need to often do that self-research and try to, hack things together on their own. And it's kind of the wild, wild west out there, particularly when it comes to, women's health and nutrition. And we unfortunately see a lot of women engaging in, diet and lifestyle habits and implementing strategies with the best intention of trying to support their body, but actually, some of these things are making their symptoms and kind of deeper dysfunction worse. To give you an example, we see a lot of women participating in things like intermittent fasting or low carb diets, these really rigid, restrictive approaches that may have some benefits for a man in perfect metabolic health in a society where there's like no stress and the application is totally different. But we see women implementing these strategies and their health going haywire. And I think ultimately a big tip that I have when you're kind of sifting through health information is to first and foremost, I think, remember that, not everything that we read is going to apply to us, and it may work for someone else, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work for us. And we have to think about the context of our life, our health. And what I really want to encourage women to do is to tune inward. I think one of the biggest things that happens with kind of the self-research and the overconsumption of health and nutrition information is that we start to lose trust in ourselves and we look solely outside. We look externally to follow like a set of rules or a set of guidelines. And, we ignore the messages that our body is sending us. An example with, say, like the low carb, ultra low carb diets or intermittent fasting, women are trying to follow these plans and they're hungry, right? They're ignoring biological hunger cues. They're experiencing, mood swings and significant, sugar carb cravings. Their sleep is disrupted, but they feel like, all right, this plan is supposed to work. So I'm going to quiet, the messages from my body and I'm going to kind of grin and bear it or white knuckle it through this plan. But I think we have to remember that, we are really, we know ourselves best. You know yourself best as an individual. And, if you're hungry, if you're experiencing cravings, considering, what might my body want, what is my body telling me here, right? Do I need more food, more nourishment, more consistent eating? And I think just a lot of the diet nutrition noise out there, it's very restriction based, elimination based. And in, my work with hundreds and hundreds of clients over the years, I find that true health is achieved and symptoms are really resolved when we can work with our body and we can kind of shift to more of an addition nutrition approach, a nourishment approach. So not, what foods can I avoid this week or what, meals can I skip? Like, how can I provide my body with more nourishment, more of, kind of the foundations that it needs to be able to feel safe and to function optimally.
Yeah. I love that. I worked for a company like right out of college as a health coach when I was, like 21. And one of the things that we were working with like very blue collar, folks who were like working in factories and, things like that. And one of the things that we talked a lot about was the addition approach, add these foods in versus, you have to take away and scrap everything that you've been accustomed to for the last, 15, 20 years of your life. So I love that, that sort of implementation strategy of like, let's add something that's going to make you feel good versus taking away the thing that actually, makes you feel like shit. And women, historically are like very, very good at the subtraction. We're very good at restricting. We don't need any more, restrictions on our diets, especially with, kind of like eating disorders and things like that, which sort of leads me actually into my next question for you, which is, this sort of, I view it as when I was dealing with all of my health issues and really was becoming immersed in learning more about women's health and about my own health, a big thing I found myself doing was I became a little obsessive about like, the food, and I was very like, strictly paleo. I'm not going to eat any, like I was no gluten, no dairy, no, basically nothing fun. And so I essentially, developed a kind of like, I will call it orthorexia, but it was very subtle at first. It was very like, you know, it almost sounded kind at first, like, oh, let's not eat this thing because it's not going to support my body. And so I'm curious how maybe these sort of subtleties show up in your work and with your clients, and how they might actually be like a little bit more insidious, and how you deal with that when you're working with patients of yours, and kind of understanding like, okay, maybe this is becoming a little obsessive, maybe this is becoming like a little borderline like orthorexia, or something of that nature. How do you deal with that when you have a client who's, trying to be like the gold star client of not eating
Yeah.
anything shitty?
Yeah, I love that you bring this up because, something I think there's a lot of extremism in the world of health, right? Like you pointed out. And it's easy for that pendulum to swing from, one side to the
Yeah.
other. And, I say this as a functional dietitian who deeply, deeply believes in food as medicine and utilizes, food and lifestyle to support, women on their healing journey, that you don't have to be perfect to achieve results. And the pursuit of perfection is often what we see creating big barriers and a lot of stress for women. It's super, super common for us to work with women that are, have some disordered tendencies with food based on the fact that they're trying to do good things for their health, and they're, again, over consuming a lot of health information. And this person says this is bad, and that person says this is bad. And, if anyone is listening to this and is experiencing that, clearly you're not alone. Both of us are, here
Yeah.
and have gone through it. And it's really common in the women that we work with. And, ultimately, what I find is that, true knowledge and education is power here in terms of really helping women to understand how to optimally fuel and nourish their body. I think it's incredibly, dysfunctional that we don't learn about these things, in middle school and high school, and learn how to actually fuel and nourish, because I think, again, women are trying to hack it together on their own, and just based on diet culture, I think it would be unusual if we didn't absorb some of
Wow.
that, right?
Right.
So with the clients that we work with, we really try to empower women with education and talk about, the why behind, the strategies we're implementing. Using, again, carbohydrates as an example, we see a lot of fear around carbohydrates. And I think for the clients we work with, once we can actually understand what carbohydrates are, how they function in the body, and actually how to utilize carbohydrates to actually enhance how we feel, to enhance our health, and then to implement that and start to get evidence from your body in terms of like, oh man, I actually feel better and I have more
Yeah.
energy and my periods are less painful. Um, but, some things I would look out for in terms of some of those disordered, tendencies would be, if you think about putting, carbohydrates on your plate, or you're thinking about certain foods, what type of feeling or emotion does that bring up in your body? Do you feel, stressed or anxious about that? Do you feel guilt associated with, any particular foods? Do you feel anxious about, going out to a restaurant and maybe not having full control over all the ingredients in, the meal that you're, going to be eating there? Those would be some red flags to me that we might need to zoom out a little bit, and
Wow.
start to kind of tease through the relationship with food. What we always say to clients too is that having a healthy relationship with your food and, with food and with your body is a very important and often neglected kind of part of achieving whole body health. It's not just about eliminating the bloating or eliminating the, painful periods. If we're doing that, in the context of having to like maintain perfection and rigidity, what good is that, right? We need to allow for flexibility to be able to show up in life fully without being preoccupied by food thoughts. And I think it kind of goes back to also, women reestablishing that trust with their own body, reminding themselves that they don't have to be perfect to achieve results. And I think, again, learning how to fuel optimally and then allowing for flexibility, allowing, to enjoy fun foods. And again, as someone that, does this work for a living and, sees the power of, food and functional nutrition day in and day out, we have to allow for fun with food and flexibility. Otherwise, we're going to create a lot of stress.
Yeah, totally. Wow, that's incredible. I think there would be so many people would live lives that are so much more fruitful if they worked with people like you who have an understanding and like a grasp of what, how food plays a role in the day-to-day, how food plays a role with our emotions, especially as women, which also just kind of, brings me to this idea or sort of this question I have about like you explore a lot of these really heavy topics with women as it relates to their health and their bodies and disordered eating and things of that nature. So is there, there's definitely a mind-body connection in all of this, and that's something that if you've been through it, that firsthand, and you as a practitioner know that. Is there a component where, at a component of therapy that you will tell somebody like, hey, I have this person I want you to go see in conjunction with the work that we're doing here? Is that something that ever comes up for you as a practitioner, kind of incorporating that like mental health care with the physical practice that they're doing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
And I always tell clients, I will be the first to kind of speak up if I feel there is, kind of complementary support needed that
Yeah.
is outside our scope. We
Right.
work a lot with clients on, mindset and improving stress resilience and kind of different nervous system support practices. But there is absolutely a line there in terms of, hey, we
Yeah.
need to bring in an expert to support the mental health aspect of things. And I think overall, a really good practitioner is going to be able to acknowledge when other support is needed. And I think having just like a really well-rounded healthcare team and people on your side, it's so important, so important. So absolutely, definitely make referrals to mental health practitioners and, other, complementary providers as well that can really enhance all of this work and bring things together for women.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's amazing. So, kind of in all of this, I would love to know from your perspective, what is like the the piece of this puzzle that you find the most frustrating and annoying as a practitioner? Like if there is one specific sort of industry within your industry that like really grinds your gears, like in terms of, be it gluten-free or dairy or alcohol or like any or all of the following. I would love to know just from your perspective as like a practitioner who's seeing, cases day in and day out, what is the thing that like pisses you off in this
Oh my
industry?
gosh, I love this question. I mean, like blood's boiling thinking about it.
Yeah.
But honestly, and I think the overuse and abuse of elimination diets is
Mhm.
what grinds my gears. And again, this is coming from someone who is a trained functional medicine provider. And, again, there's extremism all across the board in the health space. And I'm really excited that functional medicine, functional nutrition has gained a lot of popularity in recent years, and people are looking to kind of address root causes of symptoms more naturally. But I think alongside that has come, a lot of, again, the overuse and abuse of elimination diets. And it's very normal for me to, get on an introductory call with a potential client and for them to tell me, I've spent boatloads of money on all of this functional lab testing. I eliminated dairy, gluten, soy, this, that, the other thing. And I'm not any better. And, we dive into it and it's like, not only are we not better, we're actually worse. And our diet is, more restrictive, more nutrient depleted. And at the end of the day, it's a big red flag to me if an elimination diet is ever recommended or utilized as the first line of intervention. And I'll talk to women often that have been, on these extensive elimination diets that, no one has talked to them about the basics of like meal composition, meal frequency, are we eating enough? Just these basics that are getting overlooked, where of course the body can't heal when now it's operating on limited resources and there's all these, kind of big gaps in our foundation. And, there's absolutely a time and place for, exploring, say, therapeutic elimination and reintroduction of a food with a client. But there needs to be foundational work first and foremost. And there needs to be, a lot of, kind of data and signs pointing to that being necessary. And I also just want to point out about the elimination diets that, elimination diets are not a root cause solution. So, we work with a lot of women that have digestive symptoms and, they'll have eliminated this laundry list of foods and mention like, oh yeah, my bloating's better or my, constipation is better. But that's not the solution at the end of the day in my mind. Right. And what I always say to clients is that, food is not the problem. It's typically the environment that food is going into. So if we're having trouble breaking down, digesting, absorbing foods, we're having an immune mediated reaction to certain foods. Why? Why is that? Is it related to cortisol issues, gut imbalances? And, in our work with clients, it's very rare for us to, ask clients to eliminate foods. Again, there's certainly cases where someone may have a true sensitivity to gluten or dairy or something like that. But more often than not, we are trying to bring foods back in to the diet. So not only are these elimination approaches, ineffective, they're stressful. I find they keep women on this hamster wheel of not finding answers.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating because I feel like the amount of times I have heard, friends of mine who have said, "Oh, I have this thing going on. I'm not eating dairy right now," or whatever, is an astronomical number. So in your practice, then what kind of is the first line of defense? Like, what is in building that baseline? Is it, initially keeping a food journal and tracking how you feel? What kind of does that look like when you're working with somebody who really has no idea what is going on, or who has maybe even tried one of these elimination diets before?
Yeah. Great question. And when we start out with a client, we'll do, kind of a big clinical assessment and assessment of, habits, nutrition, sleep, stress, movement, all the things. And typically right off the bat, we are able to identify some really key opportunities in their foundation to make some supportive adjustments. And what I will also say is that like 99% of women we work with are generally healthy eaters and that they're trying to do good things for themselves, right? And, they're trying to move their body, trying to, eat healthy foods and make, changes based on what they've read and learned. And there are always opportunities right off the bat to make some really supportive adjustments with their foundation. So, establishing a strong foundation is key in my mind. So that's going to include balancing blood sugar first and foremost. So really working to establish a pattern of eating and to, bring together meals that really support balanced, regulated blood sugar. That's a major foundation with all of our clients that we work on. So we'll work on some of these key foundations, and that gives us a sense of how does the body feel when it's actually well supported and actually well nourished. And it's pretty amazing what some of those foundational adjustments, the benefits that we see with just that based off, kind of a clinical assessment and again, making those initial changes. From there, we do run deeper lab testing, functional lab testing. So things like gut testing, hormone testing, micronutrient testing. And we'll bring in that deeper data to understand the why more so and to kind of get a little bit more targeted with our interventions. But we are not going to start implementing, micro strategies and targeted interventions with clients if we're not eating breakfast and, we're not eating enough throughout the day and blood sugar's all over the place. These kind of deeper interventions and tweaks, I even think about, with clients that come to us and they're on boatloads of supplements, yes, supplements can be helpful and really supportive when used properly. But in the case of a shaky foundation, it's not going to do the trick. So foundations always come first in our mind, and that's going to be the blood sugar regulation, adequate nourishment, working on a really solid sleep schedule, supporting circadian rhythms, evaluating and assessing stressors. So working on these things first and foremost, and then doing a deeper dive where we can assess, what's going on in that gut environment, what's going on with our stress hormones, and we can kind of dive a little bit deeper from there.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. My current functional health practitioner, when I first went to see her, she was asking me, all of these intake questions and they spend, like 2 hours with you. So it's very different from, obviously a traditional medical practitioner. And she asked me, well, what supplements are you taking? And I was like, well, I don't take a ton right now, but I, in the past have taken loads of supplements, but I would still say my supplement regimen, at its very baseline is probably, a random person's very high amount of supplements.
Yeah.
So I was telling her, I was like, yeah, I'm on these. And she's like, okay, so we're going to stop literally all of those. And I was like, great. And she said something to me that was like probably one of the biggest green flags of any practitioner I've had, where she said, the goal is to not have you on like a million supplements for the rest of time. Like she's like, we don't want you to have to take a million things all the time. And I was like, gosh, that's so wild, because it's like every person on Instagram is, always peddling a supplement. There's always like, the supplement industry is, how many billions or maybe even trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
So, so it's fascinating to me how like a great practitioner will tell you, I don't want you to have to take these supplements for the rest of your life. So I love that you really focus on that baseline foundation, and the supplements, kind of just come in sprinkled later, as sort of an additive. So I love that. In terms of, the work that you're doing, we've talked sort of skirted around a little bit the topic of like women's fertility and that as a sort of subtopic of the work that you're doing. So in terms of, kind of the broader landscape of working in women's health, what do you think is sort of the biggest misconception that we are faced with surrounding women's fertility? People are gabbing about, fertility's never been lower in the United States, and our fertility rates are awful. And so everybody has fertility issues. Everybody's doing IVF. Like, what is the number one misconception that you think people have about the fertility crisis, quote unquote, and women's fertility maybe in general?
I think a misconception that I see a lot is just that, fertility kind of is out of our control entirely, or it sort of happens to us. What we see a lot with clients is women being on birth control for, a decade, 2 decades, and, coming off, they can't get pregnant. And then, they're kind of pushed right into fertility treatment.
Yeah.
And, as I've mentioned, I'm not anti any of these things. And, there's absolutely a time and a place for all of this. But there are so many modifiable factors that are not crazy complicated that impact our fertility that we can support for natural conception or for, improving outcomes with something like IVF, if that's the route that needs to be taken. We work with a lot of women who have, come off birth control and they have, no period, and they're told, you're not going to get pregnant naturally, so this is your next option. And it's great that we have that, those options, but there is so much that we can do to get people ovulating, regularly and naturally. There's so much that we can do from a food and lifestyle perspective to support egg and sperm quality, which is huge. And that's something that has been talked about a lot more with the declining fertility rates. So there's so much we can do to actually support and improve fertility. But I think, one, there's an overwhelming amount of information out there. And two, sometimes people kind of get pushed through the process with, fertility treatment. And, I also want to mention too, it's not that, any of these providers in our conventional system are ill-intended. The way I like to describe it is that, the way our healthcare system is, and the way that people are often trained is, medications and procedures are the tools that they have in their toolbox. So it's, again, not that the provider is ill-intended, but, the tools they have to try to get you pregnant involve these kind of more significant interventions. But, we're overlooking all of these important factors that we can actually influence. So, nutrition being a huge one, stress, sleep. Another huge one that I think is playing a big role when it comes to declining fertility rates is endocrine disruptors, or toxins and chemicals in our environment just every day, kind of toxins that are negatively impacting things like, sperm health and egg quality. And it's not that we're going to avoid or eliminate these entirely, but if we can start to create awareness and we can make mindful adjustments and swaps, we can have a big, big positive impact on fertility. So that was a super long-winded answer, but ultimately, big misconception, I just think, is that it's out of our control. And again, there are aspects that maybe we can't control, but there's so much that is modifiable. And I want people to feel really empowered by that.
That's amazing. And I think you bring up a really interesting point in that, like, in our medical system, these doctors, again, not ill-intended by any means. Usually, it's just that the tools they have are the procedures and the medications. And I always am reminded of how I have a minor in nutrition, and I believe I've taken more credit hours in my minor in nutrition than a doctor has. I think they take like 12, and I've taken like, 30, probably over 30 or 40 or something like that. And so I always think of that when I, am going in somewhere and they, like, the first thing they're doing is recommending like a medication to me, or, something like that. I'm like, well, yeah, like, but you've never, you don't really maybe understand the correlation as much as,
Totally.
could, or, so so that's incredible. So, is there, from your perspective, is there something that a woman, like a kind of number one smoking gun type thing that a woman could do to support her fertility, before she even, goes and sees like all of the practitioners and does all of those types of things to prep her body for, pregnancy? Is there something she can do on her own to really, obviously nutrition being like a key component in all of this, but is there, something that is a really tangible thing that, like, if somebody listening was like, yeah, in the next couple of years, I'd like to get pregnant, or like to start entertaining that thought. Is there a way that women can prep their bodies for pregnancy or fertility, to just kind of happen in a more natural way?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely hard to pick just one.
Sure. And certainly not like one size fits all, obviously.
Yeah,
but yeah.
But I will say, in general, focusing on a supportive nutrition foundation that stabilizes blood sugar. I'm such a broken record here. But it plays such a tremendous role with both male and, female factors when it comes to fertility. Wow. And to break that down even further, aim to have breakfast, a well-rounded, protein-rich breakfast within 1 to 2 hours of waking every single day. It's again, with the intermittent fasting and all the craziness out there, we see so many women that are skipping breakfast or delaying eating, and they have these like crazy, long overnight fasts. And what we don't often talk about is the fact that this is a stressor on the body. This jacks up our stress hormones like our cortisol, and it dysregulates our blood sugar. And one of the number one things that we want to focus on when it comes to fertility is promoting safety in the body. How can we make the body feel more safe? If resources are scarce and, we're going long periods of time without eating, the body doesn't know that that's intentional, right? Our bodies were hardwired for survival. So when the body doesn't feel safe, it's not going to prioritize reproductive health. So for blood sugar and nutrition, aim to have that really well-rounded, nutrient-dense, protein-rich breakfast, within the first 2 hours of waking. From there, ideally aim to eat, consistent meals and snacks about every 3-4 hours throughout the day, to really stabilize the blood sugar and to support, the body in terms of prioritizing that safety. In terms of thinking about like meal composition, really let's focus on balanced meals on a basic level. Let's have a great, quality protein source at meals. Let's aim to have, a great fiber-rich carbohydrate source like our starchy vegetables, our fruit, our whole grains, some healthy fats in there, and, good plated non-starchy vegetables. Keep it simple, but let's work towards, three well-rounded balanced meals and plugging in any longer gaps with some balanced snacks. And that is the least sexy and exciting thing to talk about, but it is so impactful. And, most women we work with, again, aren't doing that on a foundational level. And, before we're jumping into the, fertility treatment, or even if you're not thinking about getting pregnant for a year or 2 years or 3 years from now, start making shifts towards balancing blood sugar now, and promoting safety in the body now, and then overall, I would say just focusing on kind of, nutrient density. Again, that addition nutrition approach, how we can bring in more whole foods, and provide proper nourishment for the body. I think that's just a great, great place to start.
Nice. Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, it's fascinating to me, like when I sort of put away all of the, I sort of stopped following all of the food, people on Instagram, and I kind of put away for a while the obsession with food and how I could sort of make myself better constantly, like that. That was sort of a hamster wheel I was on for a really long time, was sort of this constant rotation of like self-improvement. It's fascinating how when I put that all to the side, I realized how like simplified so much of this was, which is like, yeah, it's not sexy. It's not like, there is no supplement that's gonna like, put your meals together for you and all of that. But it really is so kind of basic and foundational. And yes, it is complex in the sense that like, the body is a complex mechanism, and there's so many factors that go into, hormones and fertility and our cycles and all of that. But really when it comes down to like the very basics, it really is like very unsexy and very pretty straightforward, honestly. So I
Really
love that
is.
you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really is. And, there's absolutely cases where there's, deeper investigative, work needed, or more, micro strategies and interventions. But the large majority of the time, the foundations make the biggest difference. And
Yeah.
it's not the, sexy, exciting supplement, or, the eliminate this food and, all of our symptoms, kind of
Yeah.
disappear. It's really kind of showing up and supporting those foundations, being consistent and just taking
Mhm.
imperfect action.
Yeah, totally. I just saw something on, I think it was TikTok the other day, that said, the number one thing that is holding you back from anything that you want in this life is consistency. And I found that hilarious because I literally have a sticky note right above my desk that just says consistency on it,
I
because it's
love that.
kind of the one thing that I like have struggled with the most in my life, is just like maintaining this sense of consistency. So I love
Yeah.
that you bring that up. Um, okay, so a couple more questions for you and then we'll wrap things up. But I'm curious to know from your perspective of just, again, being immersed in women's health and being really involved in a time in women's lives where they're very vulnerable. They are, a lot of them might be trying to conceive soon, or, trying to learn more about their cycles or just about their bodies generally. I'm curious to know from your perspective, what in the American healthcare system is kind of your like Roman Empire, like the thing that you are fixated on, fascinated with as it relates to women's health? If there's like a real specific subset of like the way that we function in our healthcare system that like really gets you, like you could talk about it for days, or it's just something that you constantly are like, keeping up with or thinking about.
In terms of kind of like an interest in a.
Yeah, or a pet peeve, or like, if there's an area that you're just like, wow, that's really fascinating that we keep kind of coming back to this, or, anything like that, that just is like something you constantly think about specifically within the American healthcare system.
Yeah, I think the thing I constantly think about is really and I guess it is sort of a pet peeve or something I feel like I'm up against often, is the idea that with, or kind of the approach with women's health, that we need to shut everything off, or sort of suppress everything. And it often seems like the recommendation or the solution for any women's health ailment is birth control.
Yeah.
And I just find that to be so incredibly frustrating and fascinating in terms of like, man, we know so much more than that now. Like we have,
Yeah.
there's of course a lot we don't know, but there's so much that we do know. And at this point in time, how is it possible that if you have period pain, PCOS, endometriosis, amenorrhea, the one solution for all of it is a pill to, kind of shut our hormones down? So I'm definitely fascinated by that kind of still being the approach in our healthcare system. And it's, something that I'm deeply passionate about shifting. But I would say that is fascinating to me. And, that kind of our system just sort of hasn't put more resources towards figuring out how we can better support women in our system.
Yeah, totally. Are there forms of non-hormonal birth control that you like, that you think, are great, that you not necessarily would recommend, just because scope of practice maybe, but like that you're, more inclined to be supportive of, or just
Yeah.
ones that you like better than others?
I love that question. And I think the, I kind of spoke to this already, but I think like my issue here with the birth control in general is that, you know, I think it's something like over 50% of birth control is prescribed for non-contraceptive reasons, right? Where
Wow.
it's, cyclical mood related symptoms. It's the acne, it's the period pain, it's all the other things. And, I think, again, there's a time and a place for birth control, and there's pros and cons to all of the different types. But I think what really is, kind of gets me riled up is the non-contraceptive use in terms of the symptom suppression. So
Right.
that's really where I think I have more frustration, because, oftentimes women are told like, hey, you have this symptom, this is your only option.
Yeah.
When it comes to birth control, again, pros and cons to all of them, depending on sort of what you're utilizing it for.
Mhm.
When it comes to hormonal birth control, I will say I'm more inclined to like, IUDs, based on
Mhm.
the fact that, progestin only IUDs still, they don't shut down the reproductive system. So you
Right.
can still ovulate and cycle and produce
Mhm.
hormones with the hormonal IUD, like the Mirena, the Skyla, the
Yeah.
Kyleena. So I find that for women, and again, it might not agree with all women, but for our clients that, want to be on a hormonal IUD, and, maybe they're coming off of it at some point, the transition is a little bit, I don't want to say easier, but a little bit better,
Yeah.
than when we're on an oral contraceptive where reproduction is shut down entirely and our sex hormones are shut off. So I'd
Yeah.
say if you're interested in a hormonal option, an IUD would be something I would like a little bit more. There's also non-hormonal, IUDs in
Yeah.
terms of the copper IUD. Again, pros and cons there. Um, I'm, also a big advocate of the fertility, awareness method, which involves, tracking things like, basal body temperature, changes in
Right.
cervical mucus that can give you the ability to identify your fertile window, and it can
Mhm.
effectively be used as a form of contraception when used properly, and is as effective as these hormonal options. But at the end of the day, I think this also goes back to, like, you know women are not taught about their hormones. I know for me personally, when I was on hormonal birth control and didn't know a lot about women's health, I was under the impression that, like, oh, you can just get pregnant at any time, right?
Yeah, totally.
And then, I obviously learned that there's a small window, 6 days
Yeah.
in our cycle that we're actually fertile. And so a lot of this goes back to, I think, again, like informed consent and things that, like, we all should have learned in middle school
Right.
about our bodies. But
Yeah, totally. That's so funny because, like, I remember in college, again, yeah, not knowing much about my cycle really, or, my hormones, and having a Mirena IUD. And I think was, I don't know, a freshman or sophomore in college, and I would always get so paranoid that I was pregnant and didn't know it or something, or
yep,
like, because I wasn't having a cycle, like I wasn't, having an
yeah,
actual like bleed.
bleed,
So
yeah,
yeah, so I was always like chronically paranoid that I was pregnant. So I would
yep,
just like take pregnancy tests like all the time. And now I'm like, girl, like you had like such a small shot at getting pregnant with an IUD. Like I'm just,
right.
oh girl, like that. No, you just really,
But
you knew nothing about
oh
literally
my gosh, but
anything.
you're not alone. I'm laughing because that was literally,
Yeah,
me
right.
too. And you think, like, you just don't know, right?
Yeah,
It's
you
just
just have no
it's
clue.
crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Okay, amazing. Well, I want to ask, kind of one final question for you, and this is relatively, broad, but I'd love to just kind of know your answer, and kind of looking back on your journey and where you came from, and where you're at now. If you, could speak to somebody who was sort of in the middle of their undoing that looked very similar to yours, yourself 10 years ago, what would you say to them, and what would be kind of maybe the piece of advice that you would give to that person?
Oh man. So I think I would first and foremost encourage them to seek out support. Let them know you're not alone and you don't have to do this on your own. I think would be my first message. And then I think my second message would be, don't avoid addressing stress.
Mm,
So you know, I don't know if you or any of your kind of listeners can relate to this, but I think as part of my journey, I was very willing to change anything very, nutrition, exercise, all these kind of like tactical shifts, but I wanted to kind of bypass, working on my nervous system
yeah.
and stress. And it
I
was
can
very,
assure you that myself and all
yeah.
listeners can relate to that.
Yeah.
So,
It,
yeah.
it was uncomfy for me to think about having to, slow down or, kind of dive into stress outlets or, you know, so I think my journey would have looked a bit different had I, recognized the stressors in my life, had been more open to making changes related to my nervous system and stress sooner. That definitely created some barriers for me. So I would tell my past self or anyone in that situation, if looking at stress and starting to support your nervous system feels uncomfy, that's probably a sign that it's extra important.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Yeah, it's amazing what we are willing to bypass when we are in these moments of like deep discomfort already. I think, yeah, I deeply resonate with that. Like you could not have forced 21-year-old me to, to start meditating, or
Oh
like
my
slow
gosh, no.
down, or give up hit workouts. Oh my God, that would have never happened.
Yep.
So I love that you bring that up. Um, Okay, amazing. Well, Jillian, thank you so much for your time, for your expertise, for chatting with me. Before we wrap up, please tell everybody listening where they can find you, your website, your Instagram, plug all of the things.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. And in terms of where to find me, you can find me over on Instagram at Jillian Greaves RD. You can also check out my website, jilliangreaves.com. I have all sorts of, free resources there in terms of articles, recipes, guides, all sorts of really amazing resources if you're looking for some additional support. And then, for anyone interested in, kind of checking us out on a deeper level and the work that we do work with, women one-on-one, support them on their health hormone healing journey. And you can check out our website, learn about our team of amazing practitioners, if that interests you. And yeah, I look forward to connecting hopefully with people more.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Jillian. This has just been so eye-opening and lovely. So I appreciate you being here.